Tate Chronicles now transmitting.
Welcome to the Tate Chronicles on Healthcare Now Radio. And now, here's your host, Jim Tate.
Good day, citizens of the free world, from border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea. I bring you a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning in to the Tate Chronicles. Join me as we cut through the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology. I had the opportunity to talk with Charlie Harp, the CEO of Clinical Architecture, and Didi Davis, Vice President, Informatics, Conformance, and Interoperability at the Sequoia Group, as part of a recent event on sharing health data. They joined me to discuss the usability of clinical data. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about interoperability so far today in clinical data. Probably time to start talking about usability. What good is it if it's not being used? A lot of different ways it can be used, but let's discuss that. And, with Charlie from Clinical Architecture and Didi from the Sequoia Project, these are two people I want to hear their input on about this. First, though, it comes to usability of clinical data. There's some high-level issues and challenges. Before we address those challenges, let's kind of talk about what those challenges may be. Charlie, I'll start with you. What are some of the issues?
I think part of the problem we have today is we have ways to get data back and forth from provider to provider and institution to institution, but a lot of those are kind of built on a legacy approach derived from things like faxing and sending human readable messages from place to place. So a lot of when we talk about usability now, and Didi's an expert on this, but when we talk about usability now, we're really not necessarily talking about usability by a human. We're talking about usability by the systems that are meant to support human providers and clinical decision support and things of that nature. And I think we haven't necessarily cut the cord on, we're still kind of faxing, we're just doing it electronically, if you catch my drift. I think that's a problem. And I think we're making progress to move away from that. But once you start to move away from something that's intended for a human, because we humans are amazingly adaptable and heuristic machines when it comes to interpreting something we're given, software is not that amazing and not that adaptable. So you have to be much more concrete. You have to use codes and know where the codes came from. And those are things that we're still working on getting better at. I don't know. What do you think, Didi?
Yeah, and absolutely 100% spot on. I think the only thing I would add to it, to add an example really for the usability part of it. So as an example, we have all of this data. I don't know if you realize, but as of the last several months, the Care Quality Network, which is kind of TEFCA 0, if you want to call it a little bit like that, is exchanging 1 billion with a B clinical documents every single month. But some of those documents have really great data, and some have some demographics and nothing else, or it doesn't say where it's from. If you don't know where it came from, the provenance or where it came from, you may not trust that data. So those are things that you need to make it usable, trusted, tagged so that you can search through something. So the physician doesn't have to scroll through hundreds of pages of a document. You can look for specific items and making sure those things are coded right, to Charlie's point. So thinking about the usability, especially with the clinicians, with all the physician burden and all of that we have, we want to make these systems work smarter and harness that power of health IT.
One of the things I'm aware of, Charlie and Didi, is on a technical level, folks like us think about it and talk about it every day and are lulled into the belief that everybody thinks about it all day like we do. That's probably not the case. And so I thought I had a day with the TEFCA network and those qualified health information networks that are out there. I heard somebody say recently, if you've seen one Q-hen, you've seen one Q-hen. So they all meet a certain minimum standard, but some have included value-added things of stripping out redundant data, or I don't know what else they do, cleaned up data. And so the whole issue of making this data usable is those actual providers who may be using the data, the culture around, as you mentioned, Didi, trusting that data out there. And I guess part of that is going to fall on the EHR vendors because the government, unlike under meaningful use, the government paid to obtain EHRs and regional extension centers to train people to achieve meaningful use. There's no funding for people to be trained in how to deal with with data coming in, best practices for that. So that's my 2 cents on that. But I'll go back to you, Didi. I know the Sequoia Project has this initiative called Taking Root. What is that? What's that all about?
All right. So little background to kind of explain it. So the data usability work group we created way back in 2020. We put out a version 1 guide, and as of yesterday, we just published our version 2. So I am so grateful to all the volunteers that have taken countless hours over the last 2 years to create version 2.0. And so the taking root part of this is the part of it. So we've created steps, we're pointing to standards from HL7 and others. So we're not creating standards, we're just amplifying them and showing if you put these Lego blocks together and you use these codes, then this is going to give you better usability to reduce impact of duplicate data, or being able to tag data. We have a whole section on laboratory that we added because laboratories I call it a hot mess right now. So needless to say, I think the taking root part, there are 27 organizations who have pledged to implement this guidance. So that's why I had to kind of give you the backstory.
Sure.
So they're pledged publicly to say, we're going to implement or support it. So an implementer, like an Epic, Oracle, those are implementer types, and those are 2 of them that are pledged. I'll put a link to our website where you can see more here in the chat in a bit. But needless to say, these taking root folks, and Charlie is one of our wonderful pledgers here. And I'm very grateful for his expertise too, because this is a testable guide. We want folks to actually be able to, you can't fix or know what you need to improve unless you measure it. So we want to also make sure people are holding themselves accountable a little bit, because it's going to take all of us. All of us need to be those change agents to make this happen. So I'm trying to inspire and get these people all on the same page together so that we can also provide resources to them, help them with, we've got a scorecard where they can report the deployment information. We have a readiness checklist. We've created the testing tools. Going into 25, we're going to go on and add some additional things like business contracting tools or training for folks. Because to your point, there were those regional extension centers that did the training back in the meaningful use days. We need to empower people to understand about usability in all projects, because all of us need to be part of it. So that's the taking root part. And I'm happy to have those organizations. And I invite everyone, there's no cost. Everybody can be a supporter, because you can share this information with colleagues, this webinar that we have, any opportunities that you know of, I'm happy to help with, and I'm happy to hopefully share this so that you can inspire others as well.
So Charlie, how was clinical architecture working with the Sequoia Project? What are y'all doing together?
I mean, essentially, like Didi said, we've done an implementer's pledge to implement the usability guidelines of the Sequoia Project, and we became involved with the Sequoia Project a few years ago. And we're not an institution, so we're not an HCA or an Ascension. We work with a lot of those institutions to help them with data quality and help them with data. But what we wanted to do with the Sequoia Project is just be a part of the conversation and see how we could better help our clients, implement and interoperate and be able to receive the data that's kind of moving through TEFCA, because they all need it. The goal of interoperability is an important goal. I mean, the idea is for providers and software and measures and all these things to do a better job. They need a more complete, more accurate picture of what's going on with every single patient that is being treated by that entity. And to be able to do that effectively, you need something like TEFCA. You need some way of getting that data. And like you mentioned earlier, Jim, you need to trust the data. Because it's one thing, if you send the data via fax or via a readable text blurb, You inform one person, the person that reads that document. If you can send the data in a trusted, consumable way, a usable way by a platform, the goal of software, the goal of EHRs and these other tools, at the EHR level, the goal is to help extend the capabilities of the human provider by doing things like decision support and maybe finding things that a human provider can't find on their own. The other benefit is when you start to do things like quality measures and value-based care, having that structured data allows the system to look not just at the patient, but across an entire population. So at Clinical Architecture, it's kind of weird because we build solutions that focus on data quality and interoperability and these things, but we don't actually have data. We're kind of like a genie in the bottle. And I saw the Sequoia Project as being a way for us just to be more effective and to make sure that when we're helping our clients, we're not helping them in a silo, because we do way too much of that in healthcare where people reinvent the wheel and solve a problem in a silo. And initiatives like what's happening with Sequoia Project, with TEFCA, with the QHINs, is really more of a let's figure out a solution, a pattern where we can solve this together, and then lean into that pattern and make some things happen.
Yeah, so I'll just add real quick, for a moment, hot off the press this week. So we have the data usability work, but Sequoia convenes interoperability matters, which are lots of different work groups. One of the newer ones is privacy and consent, and Devin McGraw and Dr. Stephen Lane are the co-chairs for that. And just this week here, we decided to collaborate with the privacy and consent work group because they're putting out a landscape analysis, but they want to put some teeth behind something and they want it to be testable. So we're going to collaborate together with that work group to actually add some guidance, maybe to a 2.1 release somewhere in the future. So I think that's the party that we need to think about, all these use cases and making sure that we can help educate everyone on how they can help make the difference.
You know, one thing I often wonder about over the years and in the years ahead, we have work groups and initiatives and TEFCA projects and things like that. As these are designed, are providers who are seeing 20 or 30 patients a day involved in driving that bus as to which direction this is all going?
My two co-chairs for the data usability work group are two practicing clinicians. So Dr. Bill Gregg from HCA Healthcare is one of the one of the co-chairs. The other one is Dr. Adam Davis from Sutter Health. He's a practicing pediatrician at Sutter. So I have real clinicians, but we've also taken and we created a laboratory tagger team because I'm not a lab expert. So I needed to convene the right people. We've had what we call clinical summits, where we've worked with nurses and clinicians that are not just providers or the physicians in general, to try to make sure we got their pain points, because that's how we created the data usability. We did kind of a survey and we restarted for version 2. We looked at what was in the parking lot that we didn't do the last time, and we saw what we needed to do and scoped something. The goal of the data usability guides are to publish something that can be implemented in 18 months. So we're trying to make little baby steps, because we can't boil the ocean overnight. We need to kind of raise all boats at the same time. So we're trying to do that. But we're aligning, you mentioned TEFCA and all that. We're trying to align with regulations everywhere possible, because guess what? No one does it unless there's a little push. So we're leveraging US CDI version 3 as the baseline of our guide. And guess what? That happens to be implemented within the industry and production by January 1st, 2026. So that's in our 18-month timeline. We're saying, hey, look ahead, start getting ready, because this is coming. If you're in the promoting interoperability programs or do Medicare, Medicaid, you're probably doing some of this stuff. So how can you improve that even better? But yeah.
Right. Yeah, I just know in the early years of some of the EHRs, the interfaces were developed by developers without a lot of provider input.
And it's interesting, Jim. I've been doing this as a developer. I've been doing work in healthcare for about 35 years, and the truth is there's a lot of moments where developers don't necessarily. They look at the pattern. They don't look at what people are actually trying to do. It's one of the things that when I was teaching younger developers to develop code for a clinical setting, I would say, you need to build a tool. You need to understand how it works from the people that are using it. And then you need to use it for 2 hours straight. And if you don't want to blow your brains out, you probably did a good job building the interface. But you really have to respect the expert, the subject matter expert. It is so incredibly important that you never lose sight that you're trying to build something to make people's lives better. And the best measure of whether you're making their lives better is whether they tell you you're making their lives better. So you're absolutely right. We've had a lot of missteps developing software for clinical folks in the last 20 years.
On a slightly different topic, Charlie, you recently announced the creation of a PIQI as a standard for the quality of clinical data. What is PIQI and how's it going to work?
So the Patient Information Quality Improvement Framework, or what I call it PICI, was something that I started working on about a year ago. It was initially a product idea, and what the idea behind it is right now we have all these tools for validating the formats that we send data, whether we're sending it via HL7, CCDA, FHIR, OMOP, X12, 837, 835. But at the end of the day, the data that we send in that payload, regardless of what format it's in, is what we need to make sure is of the utmost quality. And so we don't really have a way in healthcare to objectively measure and report on the quality of information that is coming through in a message. And so the goal I had at the time was to create something that could be an objective measure based upon a rubric. Let's say USCDI version 3 is a rubric. Could be an objective measure so that we could look at data that we're receiving from elsewhere, a payload, and say whether or not it's acceptable quality. But beyond that, also be able to communicate to the source of the data why they got the quality score they got. So that's why it's a quality improvement framework. Because I think today what happens is we have a requirement, a regulatory requirement to share data with the world. But there's nothing that says the data has to be good. We just have to share it. And I think there's a lot of people that share data. And what I find is when people are sharing data, they don't care as much about the data they're sharing as they do about the data they're receiving. So they might have totally good intentions. They might think they're sending the best data in the world. And then people who receive it don't want to use it or don't trust it enough to try to use it. So they've never really measured and looked at it other than reading it with the human eyeball. So the idea behind PICI is if we can objectively measure the data using a rubric that everybody agrees on, I can say your data score is 67%. This is why. And these are the 14 things that if you fix them, you'd have a perfect score. And your data would be high quality, and I would let it in. And then the people that are sending out the data would see that and say, oh, wait, if I just put the code system into the code for Loink, well, that solves half of these problems. And if I put my decimal in the right place in the result field, that solves that problem. And so the idea is with something like PICI, and so one of the things that I decided to do was not build a product, but make a standard. So I've been working with the Levitt partners and other folks, the VA, ASTP, and FDA to look at what it would take for us to take this design and make it an open standard and create a reference implementation so that anybody can build their own PICI scorecard, so that we can publish and agree on the rubrics for certain measures or certain ways of measuring. And so that maybe collectively we can all work on improving the quality of the data, the trustability of the data, so that these utilities like TEFCA and the QHINs can actually be put to maximum use. Because if we're gonna go to the trouble to run plumbing to deliver water to everybody, that water should be drinkable. And so PICI allows us to measure that and see that the water is drinkable. And I'm super excited about it.
Charlie, if folks want to learn more about that, I sure do. Where do they go?
Pickyframework.org,
Okay.
PITY framework.org. And if you scroll down past the videos, if you want to hear more of my voice, you can listen to the videos. Maybe
Okay.
take a nap. But when you get down to the bottom, there's a contact us where you can say, hey, I want to be kept in the loop or I want to be part of it. And we're going to be forming an executive steering committee in January and move this thing towards HL7 ballot probably sometime in the summer.
Okay, great. Didi, am I correct? The Sequoia Project just had an annual conference.
It's still going on. It doesn't end until this afternoon. So
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah, they're
Well,
downstairs. I'm upstairs. So
yeah. What's been the framework, or what's been the primary things that are coming out of this conference?
oh my goodness. Well, we had Mickey also. He was here in person. I knew he flew home yesterday to be able to do
Yeah.
this program, but we've had so many, mostly panels. So the theme is most of our sessions have been panel of people, and so what we've done is collectively gathered folks that are actually talking about these problems and putting real details in place. So like yesterday, there was a panel talking about privacy and consent, but
Mm.
they actually had some use cases and they had all the panelists. There was somebody from, a hospital organization. So you can go to the website and see all the people, but needless to say, it was funny because they said, what is treatment? And they actually had a real use case and talked through it. And it's like all four of the panelists just, they couldn't agree on whether it was treatment or it wasn't treatment. And it depended upon, well, exactly how was this information asked for and that trust thing again. So those types of things have been happening. And I will say something that I got a lot of comments on. We even had something called the Q-Hen dating game, and I was the bachelorette. So we're trying to make it a little fun. There'll be videos that'll be available for all the Sequoia members posted. So if you weren't able to attend in person, there'll be that, and all the attendees can have access to those as well. So we're hoping to share some with others, but it's been a fun event, and it's bringing the participants, the sub participants, the Q-Hens. It's the same people we've been working with care quality already. They're now doing a lot more of the work doing the TEFCA side of things. And, just to give you a different idea, and these were stats were quoted, TEFCA is where we need to go. I'm 100% behind it, but we can't lose sight of what's already working. And yes, there'll be maybe some convergence of this, but Care Quality Exchange's 1 billion with the B documents. TEFCA last month exchanged 3.3 million. So 3 million, 1 billion, it's going to take time.
Sure.
And we've got to get people together because you've got to onboard all these. But if we can start asking them to do the, self-assessment content type testing and scorecarding it, so they're measuring it, then we can bring all these things together and hopefully make it even better.
Thank you for that, Didi. We only have about 5 minutes left, but one last thing I'd like to hear y'all address is the issue of data quality and usability for lab data.
Mm.
Why is that a separate thing for us to be concerned about? What's the issues with lab data?
You want to start, Charlie?
Sure. So clinical architecture was asked by ASTP ONC to do a analysis of about 100 million lab results. And of the 100 million lab results, what we found is about 68% of them were coded to LOINC. About 2% of them had the right SNOMED codes for qualitative results like positive, negative, detected, not detected. And the overall thing with lab is when you're interoperating with patient data, you have data that is like hard data. It's like real objective scientific data. And then you have a bunch of data that's like subjective. I think the patient has this issue. I think this is what's going on. And so lab data is so valuable when it comes to trying to understand what's going on with the patient. And it's been something we've been sharing for decades. I built a lab interface in 1987. That's how long we've been exchanging lab data. So I think that it's very critical to what we do in healthcare. And we still have not got to the point where the quality is 100% usable. Didi.
You're 100% right. So you're doing this with, ASTP. There was also a group that did a report MIT and organization called Synesis published a report with some FDA funding that our usability paper points to. So it gives you kind of the breadcrumbs in the usability guide so that you'll understand where these problems are and some of the breadcrumbs to how to help solve them. And taking that one step further, one of the things we added, that was the net new big part of the guide, from 42 pages to 66 pages. And a lot of that was a new chapter for laboratory guidance. We also changed some things that were in version 1, maybe a should to a shall. So we strengthened some of the requirements, things like that. And we did use USCDI v3, but in the lab piece of it, I think the big problem was there's not even awareness of how do you map this information from FHIR, which is one way to send data, V2 messages, which is how it's being exchanged today, and CDA documents. There's no breadcrumb trail for that. So we've added that, and we've worked with HL7. So we provide that feedback loop to the standards organization to help us create new sample things, help us with education as well. So we're trying to help harness everybody collaborating with those that are partnered with us to help improve this. We're hopeful the lab piece, our main goal there was let's make sure we do this electronically. If you get something with a LOINC code from the lab, but your hospital remaps it because you have to do that, keep the original code and remap it. And it gives guidance on how to do that. So trying to preserve some of that data so that you could trend it, things like that, making it usable again.
So you don't order duplicate tests.
Exactly.
There are so many benefits to lab data, and really it should be low-hanging fruit because it's been around a while.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, our time is totally up. Charlie and Didi, thanks for joining us today. And the whole issue of usability of data, the technical aspects, there's the cultural aspects. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make that horse drink. So we're kind of at that place of getting the horse to drink to benefit us all. Thanks so much for your time today. To our audience, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Tate Chronicles. And I offer a special salute to my guests today, Charlie Harp and Didi Davis. You can find more information on this show's program page at healthcarenowradio.com. That's healthcarenowradio.com. Until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.
Tate Chronicles transmission ending now.